Earth had long since been abandoned. A century had passed since the Kshuir invasion crushed humanity into nothingness, or so they thought. Once a thriving planet with cities full of life, now it was only a dead world covered in ruins and dust. The skies, once clear and blue, were now an endless gray nothingness. The sound of nature had been replaced by the silence of the forgotten Earth, lay in its grave, forgotten by most of the galaxy. But there was one voice that refused to be silenced, a single human survivor who refused to let her people be erased from history. Marla Anderson had been one of the last to survive when the Kshuir first landed and decimated the human population. She had watched her friends fall one by one until she was the only one left in a world of ash and rubble. She had been a soldier once, and that part of her had never died with her comrades. It had become something more, a fire that refused to burn out even in the most hopeless of situations. Now she lived in a hidden underground shelter deep beneath the crumbling remains of what was once a bustling city. She had food supplies enough to last her years, but she knew there would never be a way to erase the loneliness that gnawed at her every day. Her only contact with the outside world were the old radios and satellite systems scattered throughout the Earth's decaying infrastructure. For years, she had sent out transmissions hoping that somehow someone somewhere would hear her, calling out to any surviving humans she could find. She couldn't bring herself to believe that humanity had truly vanished forever, even as the years dragged on. And no reply ever came. Marla's hope never wavered. She had been trained for situations like this, and every day she pushed forward, not just for survival, but for something more. The memories of her fallen comrades, the faces of those she had lost, pushed her to keep going and keep fighting, even though there was no one left to fight against the silence. After all, there was always a chance someone might hear her message. Maybe they were out there scattered among the stars somewhere. She couldn't let the thought of that possibility slip away. Her transmissions were simple at first, little more than a signal to confirm she was alive. But over time they became more desperate, more filled with emotion. The words of her broadcasts were not just about survival anymore. They became a plea for humanity to remember their strength, their willpower, and their unity. Even after the fall, she wanted to remind the galaxy that humankind was not just a casualty of war. We were not easily forgotten, not if she had anything to say about it. So each day she sent her message into the void of space, hoping that against all odds someone would hear it, someone would respond. Maybe there was more to humanity than the wreckage of a dead world. Maybe, just maybe, the fire of humankind had not gone out completely. And if anyone could spark it again, Marla would be the one to do it. It had been months since Marla last heard any response to her broadcasts. The silence was overwhelming, and though she never allowed herself to lose hope, there were times when doubt crept into her mind. Still, she kept sending her message every day, even as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months. She could not stop herself from trying. She could not let go of the belief that there was someone out there waiting to hear her voice. Then one day something changed. It was subtle at first, a brief flicker in the static of the radio, followed by a series of strange noises, a frequency she didn't recognize. At first Marla froze, her hands shaking, as she listened carefully. She had heard nothing but silence for so long. She almost couldn't believe her ears. Was it possible? Could it be someone else, another human? Or was it just another malfunction in the equipment she had come to rely on for so long? She hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to respond or simply let the moment pass by. But something deep inside her told her this was different. She reached for the transmitter and began speaking, her voice trembling, but determined. Her words were simple at first, just a greeting in case it was someone who might be out there. She had no way of knowing who or what had contacted her, but she had to try again. The silence that followed her transmission was agonizing, but then the strange static returned, louder this time, the sound of something more like a voice cutting through the noise. The words were distorted, but there was no mistaking it. A reply had come from the depths of space. Marla's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of the response. The voice was not human. It wasn't even a language she had ever heard, but somehow it was clear enough to understand. A message had been sent back to her. It was brief and filled with strange tonal shifts. But one thing was clear: someone else was out there. They had heard her. They knew she was still alive. And that was all that mattered. She quickly began to prepare another transmission, her mind racing with possibilities. The aliens were real. They had heard her message, and now they were acknowledging her presence on Earth. She didn't know if this was a good sign or a dangerous one, but it didn't matter. What she knew now was that she was no longer truly alone. For the first time in years, Marla felt a spark of hope ignite within her. She was not just a lone survivor, she was part of something bigger than herself. Somewhere out there in the vast unknown were beings who had listened to her call and responded in kind. They had not forgotten humanity's existence. No matter how small and insignificant her signal may have seemed when she finished her transmission, she sat back for a moment and took a breath. Something had changed today. She wasn't just waiting anymore. She was part of a bigger story, and it was only just beginning. The reply had come, and Marla sat there staring at the radio as if waiting for the next response. Her heart pounded in her chest. Each moment felt like an eternity. She couldn't believe it. She had heard a voice out there. It wasn't human, but it was a sign that Earth's story hadn't ended yet. But she also couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that came with it. The more she listened to the strange static, the more she realized the aliens weren't just acknowledging her. They were learning her signal. They were tracking it somehow, and this knowledge made her cautious. Should she trust these beings who had heard her call? Or should she prepare herself for something worse? As the days passed, Marla continued to send out transmissions. She didn't know what else to do. She couldn't just sit idly by and wait for answers. The silence between the static was deafening, but she felt compelled to keep trying, hoping that the next transmission would offer some clue about these mysterious beings out there. Her instincts told her they were coming closer. They weren't just watching, they were planning something. She couldn't explain why, but Marla felt in her gut that they weren't coming in peace. Then came the day when the sky above her shelter darkened. She wasn't prepared for it. She had been so focused on the transmissions and the unknown that she hadn't realized how close the aliens were until it was almost too late. She watched as ships descended from the heavens, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere with ease. The alien vessels were unlike anything she had ever seen. They shimmered in the dim light of the ruined Earth, their massive sizes dwarfing everything beneath them. Marla's breath caught in her throat. The realization hit her hard. This wasn't just some reconnaissance mission. This was an invasion. They were coming for Earth, for the last remnants of humanity that had once thrived here. She quickly retreated into the depths of the shelter, her heart racing as she ran through the hallways and into the control room. She had prepared for a day like this, not knowing when or if it would ever come. She had laid traps, rigged the old equipment to send out false signals, and automated defenses into motion, everything she could do to delay the inevitable. But now it felt like it was all too little too late. She sat down in front of the old terminal and began to input commands, her fingers trembling but determined. She knew the aliens had detected her presence on Earth by now, and they were likely closing in on her location. Her only hope was to outwit them, to make them believe they were wrong about Earth, to give humanity a fighting chance. She broadcasted a message to the sky, a final plea for survival. She didn't know if anyone would hear it, but she had to try. She couldn't let this be the end. She couldn't let her people be erased from history without a fight. The message was simple but powerful. It was a plea for mercy, a cry for the galaxy to remember humanity as something more than just a footnote in the annals of the stars. Then she sat back in the chair and waited, hoping that somehow, somewhere, someone would hear her voice before it was too late. The message had been sent, and now Marla sat in the silence of her shelter, waiting. Her eyes never left the screen of the terminal as the alien ships hovered above Earth. The feeling of dread crept over her. She had no idea if anyone would respond to her plea, or if it was too late. Maybe the Shire had already decided Earth was beyond saving. Maybe they would wipe out humanity once and for all, and leave nothing but ashes in their wake. But deep down, Marla refused to believe that. She couldn't let herself fall into despair. Even as the shadows of the alien ships loomed over the ruins of her world, the silence that followed her transmission seemed endless. For a moment, Marla thought perhaps she had been too hasty. Perhaps they hadn't heard her message, or worse, they had ignored it. But just as hope began to wane, she heard something, a faint crackle on the radio, a burst of static breaking through the silence. And then a voice. It was soft, but unmistakable, a voice that wasn't human. She froze as she listened closely. It was difficult to make out at first, but there was no mistaking it. Someone was responding to her. Someone was out there. Someone had heard her call. Her heart raced as the words became clearer. although she didn't understand the language. There was no mistaking the tone of it. A feeling of recognition flowed through her. It was a strange voice. But it wasn't hostile. It wasn't the cold harshness of the Shire. It wasn't even the fear she had expected from some unknown species reaching out to the last human alive. No, this was different. This was something else. It was as if the voice was asking questions, curious, not aggressive. Marla's mind raced as she processed the words in her head. She had no way of knowing what this voice wanted, but something told her it wasn't an enemy. It was something else altogether. Maybe an ally, maybe a friend. For the first time since the invasion, Marla felt a spark of hope ignite within her. Maybe the galaxy wasn't so vast and empty. Maybe there were still others out there who hadn't given up on humanity. She quickly grabbed the transmitter and began responding, her hands shaking as she spoke. She didn't know who or what this being was, but she had to try again. She had to reach out. She didn't know what would happen next, but she couldn't stop herself from speaking. She couldn't stop herself from trying to connect, even if it was just a faint thread of hope that connected her to the stars above. Marla sent another message, not just a plea for survival this time, but a challenge, a declaration that humanity was still here, that the human spirit had not been crushed by the invasion, that it was still alive and kicking, even if it was just one voice left standing against the darkness. She didn't know who would respond or what would happen next, but for the first time in years, Marla felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a future worth fighting for. Maybe she wasn't truly alone anymore. The days passed slowly after the transmission, and Marla found herself constantly on edge. She had sent the message hoping that someone out there would hear her voice, and for the first time since the invasion, she wasn't sure whether she wanted a response or not. On one hand, the idea of reaching out to another being in the vast unknown was a small beacon of hope, but on the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that this could be a dangerous gamble. What if these beings were just like the Shire? What if they came to finish what the Shire had started? But despite her fears, she knew she had to know. She couldn't hide in the ruins forever. So she waited. Each moment felt like an eternity. And then one day the radio crackled again. The voice returned, but this time it was different, clearer than before. It was the same tone, but there was a sense of urgency in the words. It wasn't just a casual reply anymore. It was as if the voice was trying to convey something important. Marla's pulse quickened as she strained to understand the strange language. She had no way of translating it, but she could sense the emotion in it. Something in the voice resonated with her, a feeling of understanding. But still Marla hesitated. Should she respond again? She wasn't sure if she could trust these voices, but after everything that had happened, could she afford to shut them out entirely? She knew she had no other choice. She had to take a chance. Reaching for the transmitter again, she took a deep breath and spoke, her voice shaking but strong. She didn't know what the being on the other end of the line wanted, but she hoped they could understand the one thing she had left to say. She told them she was human, and that humanity had survived the fall. She spoke of the invasion of the Shire, of the devastation they had brought, but she also spoke of hope, of humanity's enduring will to survive. She spoke of the resilience of those who had fallen and of the need for the galaxy to remember who humans truly were, not just victims, but survivors and fighters. The message was simple, but it was all she could give. She didn't know if the voice on the other side would understand or if they would care, but she had to try again. And then there was silence. Marla waited, the minutes stretching on like hours, the cold fear creeping into her chest again. Was she talking to ghosts? Was this just another empty void out there waiting to swallow her up? But then the radio crackled again, and the voice was back this time. The language wasn't alien at all. It was broken, but it was understandable. The words that came through the static were nothing short of shocking. It was a question, a single word. Why? Marla blinked in confusion. She hadn't expected a question, but then it hit her. The voice wasn't asking about the past or the Shire. It was asking about her. It was asking why humanity had not given up yet, why she had survived when so many had perished, why she had kept fighting after all this time. It was a question she hadn't asked herself before, but now it was the only thing that mattered. The question hung in the air between them, and for the first time Marla didn't know the answer, but she would find it if it was the last thing she did. The question lingered in Marla's mind as the radio crackled softly in the background. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Why had she kept fighting when so many had given up? Why had she survived When others had fallen, there were no easy answers to that question. She had never really asked herself before, but now the weight of it hung over her like a heavy cloud. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about something more, something deeper than just staying alive. It was about remembering who humanity was, what humanity had stood for even after the sheer invasion wiped out most of the species and left the planet in ruins. There was still a part of Marla that believed in something greater than herself. She believed in the resilience of humanity. She believed that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humans had the strength to rise again. No matter how long it took or how difficult the journey was, she believed in the human spirit. She knew that was why she kept fighting even when there seemed to be no hope left. But now the voice from the other side of the radio had asked her why, and she wasn't sure how to answer. All she could do was think about the moments she had lived through, the losses she had endured, the friends and family she had watched fall to the invasion. She thought about the faces of the people who had given everything just to survive in a world that no longer cared about them. She thought about the children who would never grow up, the laughter that had once filled the streets of cities now reduced to rubble. She thought about the future that had been stolen from her and from everyone who had once called Earth home. And then she realized it wasn't just about fighting to survive. It was about fighting for that future, the future that was taken from them. It was about honoring the sacrifices of those who had gone before her and ensuring that humanity's story didn't end in silence. She wasn't alone in this fight. Even if she was the last one standing, she was fighting for everyone who couldn't fight anymore, for those who had been silenced, for those who had been forgotten. She realized that was why she hadn't given up, why she hadn't just let the silence of the planet consume her. She was carrying the memories of the past with her, and she would not let them fade away, not on her watch. The radio crackled again, and this time the voice was different. It was no longer just a question, it was a statement. The words were broken, but clear. The message was simple. We are not alone in this fight. Marla's heart raced as the meaning of those words sank in. It was the first time she had heard something that wasn't just a question or an observation. It was a declaration that whoever was on the other end of the line had seen her, had understood what she was fighting for, and was willing to stand with her. She had connected with someone across the stars, someone who believed in humanity just as much as she did. Marla felt a surge of strength rise within her as she realized that she wasn't fighting alone anymore, and for the first time in years she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The words echoed in Marla's mind. We are not alone in this fight. She repeated them to herself over and over, as if trying to make sure they were real. It was hard to believe after all the years spent in isolation, after all the silence. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the message wasn't just a statement. It was a promise. The voice on the other end wasn't just offering words. They were offering something more. They were offering a chance for humanity to survive, and maybe even to thrive again. Marla sat back in her chair and took a deep breath as the weight of the message settled over her. She didn't know who these beings were or where they had come from, but she knew they had seen something in humanity, something that even the HFY had missed. It was a spark of life, something that couldn't be extinguished. No matter how hard the universe tried, Marla wasn't sure what to do next, but she knew that her next steps would determine the future, not just for her, but for all of humanity. She had to trust in the promise of the voice, and somehow she had to find a way to communicate more clearly. She reached for the transmitter again and started sending out a new message. Her hands were steady now. There was a sense of purpose in everything she did. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the future she had lost, and for the future that might still be possible. She spoke into the radio, asking the voice on the other end to help her understand more about them. She needed to know who they were, what they wanted, and why they had chosen to reach out to humanity. She couldn't waste this opportunity to connect. She couldn't let it slip away into the void of space. As she waited for a response, the silence that followed felt almost unbearable. It wasn't that the wait was too long, it was that she had never truly expected this kind of hope to come into her life again. For so many years she had thought that humanity was finished, that Earth was a lost cause. But now someone was listening, someone was answering, and she couldn't afford to waste it. She needed answers just as much as they needed hers. What did they want from humanity? What were they offering? How far had they come? How much of their own people had they risked to reach out to the last human alive? Marla felt a chill run through her, even as she knew that this could be a new beginning. She didn't know if the answers she sought would come soon, or if they would take time to unfold, but what she did know was that she wasn't going to stop fighting for it. She wasn't going to stop reaching out to whoever was willing to listen, just as she had never stopped reaching out for her own humanity. No matter how far the galaxy stretched, no matter how empty it seemed, she would never let herself believe that there was nothing left of humanity's fire, because she knew now that the fire had never truly gone out, and that fire was burning bright once more. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Marla's breath was shallow as she waited for any sign of response from the beings on the other side of the radio. Her fingers hovered over the transmitter, ready to speak again at the slightest crackle of noise. But nothing came, no static, no voice, no sign of life from the galaxy that had once seemed so distant yet now felt so close. Her heart began to race as doubt crept in. Was this a mistake? Had she been wrong to trust the message? Had she misunderstood their intentions? After all this time, could it all be some cruel illusion? Was there truly no one left to answer her call? But just as the silence became unbearable, she heard it again, the familiar static cutting through the air this time. It wasn't a question or a statement. It was a simple acknowledgement. It was clear and unambiguous. The voice on the other side of the line had heard her and understood her. The beings were not just interested in humanity. They were offering something more. They were offering alliance. They were offering hope. It was the first time in years that Marla felt as if the universe hadn't forgotten her or humanity as a whole. It was the first time in years that she felt like there might actually be a future after all the destruction, the loss, the devastation humanity had endured. There was still a chance to rebuild, to reconnect, and to rise again. The message that came through wasn't long, but it was powerful. It spoke of a shared history, a history that spanned galaxies, not just worlds of war, but of peace, a long-lost bond between beings who had once been allies long before the Kshatriya invasion had driven them apart. The message promised aid, technology, and wisdom to help humanity rebuild the civilizations that had fallen. It was a chance to start again, a chance to learn from the mistakes of the past and rebuild the legacy of humankind on a foundation of unity and trust. Marla felt tears well up in her eyes as she listened to the words she had never imagined hearing, not in her wildest dreams. She had always imagined a future full of struggle and hardship, the fight for survival never ending. But now there was a possibility that humanity could return to the stars, not just as survivors, but as contributors to the larger galaxy, a part of something greater than themselves. For the first time in a century, Marla allowed herself to believe in something more than survival. She allowed herself to imagine a future where humanity thrived again, where the scars of the past didn't define them but shaped them into something stronger. She took a deep breath as the message ended and silence once again filled the shelter, but this time it wasn't the oppressive silence of a world forgotten. It was the quiet before the storm, the calm before a new beginning. Marla knew she couldn't waste a moment. She had to act. She had to take the first step toward the future that had just opened before her. She grabbed her radio again and began to speak, her voice steady but full of emotion. She thanked them for their message, for their offer, and pledged that humanity would stand ready to join them in this new chapter of the galaxy. She spoke with conviction for the first time in years, not just as a survivor, but as a representative of something far greater. Humanity was not finished. We were just getting started, and together with the beings who had reached out to her, they would show the galaxy the true strength of the human spirit.